Block lettering, also known as sans serif lettering, is one of the most useful lettering styles you can learn. It's bold, it's readable, and once you understand how it's built, you can push it in a lot of different directions without it falling apart. In this video, I'll show you how to construct block letters step by step, how to space them properly, and how to change their look just by tweaking proportions. I'll also give you a few project ideas that you can try right after this. No fancy tools, just structure. Quick terminology note before we start. Block letters are often used as a casual term for sans serif letters. Sans serif literally means without serif, which refers to those small decorative stroke endings that you see in serif typefaces. Another big difference between the two is the stroke contrast. Serif letters often have more variation in stroke thickness, while block letters or sans serif letters are usually more uniform. For this video, we'll stick to clean sans serif block letters. Tool-wise, this is quite simple. All you really need is a pencil and some paper. A ruler can help, but it's not mandatory. This is more about how you think than what you use. Alright, let's start building letters. Before worrying about outlines, shadows, or effects, the most important thing to learn is structure. A strong structure makes everything so much easier and saves you any sort of guesswork. The goal here is to build letters from the inside out. The first step is what I call the skeleton method. You reduce the letter to its simplest form using just single lines. Basically, you're just drawing the letter. At this stage, you're deciding the height, the proportions, the posture, and so on. You're not drawing any sort of thickness. You're not decorating. You're just deciding how the letter is gonna stand. If the skeleton looks balanced, the final letter will almost always work. Once the skeleton is in place, we add thickness using what I call the wooden board technique. Trademark still pending. Imagine dividing the letter into simple shapes and stacking wooden planks along each other. The goal here is consistency. You should focus on getting even stroke widths, having clean corners, and smooth transitions for those rounded letters, of course. Once the structure is solid, you can fill in the shapes and turn it into a finished block letter. A very common beginner mistake is drawing block letters by outlining the outer shape first and then filling them in afterwards. That usually leads to uneven stroke widths, awkward spacing, and stiff-looking letters. When you build from the outside in, you really lose control of the structure. Building from the skeleton outward keeps everything very flexible and intentional. Okay, what about rounded letters? So far this works great for straight and diagonal letters, but rounded letters are indeed a bit trickier. Let's take the letter O for example. You can eyeball it, which is obviously faster but less controlled, or you can build it structurally. If I break the O down, it's basically 4 strokes, up, down, left and right, essentially a square. From there I draw the boards and then simply round the inner and the outer corners. That's pretty much it. Depending on the style you want, this can feel more squared or more rounded. Both are completely valid, and it just comes down to a design choice. Most block letters fall into 3 groups: straight, diagonal, and rounded letters. Straight letters are usually the easiest. Diagonal letters introduce angle control, while rounded letters are often the most challenging because thickness through curves really requires careful observation. If you understand how construction applies to each group, you can approach any letter with confidence. Okay, how about we put everything together and draw a word? For this example, I'll do the word block, obviously. I'll start by drawing the skeletons for the entire word first. Then I'll add thickness using the wooden board technique. This makes the spacing and consistency much easier to control. Keep in mind that when drawing words using the wooden board technique, I don't strictly follow it. What I mean by that is that I still break down the letters into individual shapes, I just do it in a way that I see fit in the moment. This is something that you just realize the more you draw. Sometimes breaking the rules really makes sense. Okay, let's talk about spacing, which I think is probably one of the most important topics of this video. To sum it up, spacing is optical and not mechanical. What I mean by that is that 2 spaces can measure the same and still look completely different depending on the letter shapes around them. And I think that the example that you see right here really illustrates that point perfectly. The top example displays mechanical spacing, where the space is equal between each ending and beginning of a letter, which obviously looks stupid. The bottom example has the spacing adjusted optically because not every letter begins or ends the same. Here's a simple rule of thumb. Straight letters usually tolerate a bit more breathing room. Curved letters visually close space and often need to sit closer. Diagonal letter pairs often create large triangular gaps and usually need extra tightening. Always trust your eye over equal measurements, and don't worry, this just comes with time and practice, and there is simply no other way around it. Oh, and by the way, spacing individual letter pairs is also known as kerning. And if you want to train your lettering eye without having to draw letters all the time, there's a free online kerning game. The goal here is to properly adjust the kerning pairs, and you get a score based on how well you did it. I highly recommend it to check it out, and even just a few minutes with it goes a long way. Once the structure works, you can dramatically change the look of block letters just by adjusting proportions. Try playing with width, height, stroke weight, endings, or even the axis. The construction stays the same, only the decisions change. This is how you get multiple styles from one system. We finally get to my favorite part of the video. Now, instead of just drawing straight, rigid block letters over and over again, this is where things can get really interesting. These are a few project ideas that you can explore what block letters can actually do once the structure is solid. Starting off with the easiest way to add some energy is to play with the baseline. Let some letters sit higher, let others dip slightly. On top of that, you can introduce an axis shift on each letter. You're not breaking the structure, you're just introducing a different and playful rhythm. Even small shifts like this can make a word feel more playful and alive. Another great exercise is interlocking letters. This forces you to make better spacing decisions because every letter affects the next one. It's a really effective way to train your eye and to think more about composition instead of isolated shapes. My recommendation to make it more effective is to keep the letters more squared rather than rounded. Block letters also pair extremely well with script lettering. The contrast between rigid structure and fluid strokes creates a natural hierarchy and visual balance. You don't need to overthink it. Let the block letters do the heavy lifting and let the script add movement. You can also start thinking in terms of layouts, not just words. Placing block letters along an arc, a wave, or a curve instantly adds motion, even though the letters themselves stay upright and structured. This is a great way to practice composition without changing your lettering style. To get nice arcs, I do recommend working with a ruler. Another useful exercise is fitting block letters into shapes. Circles, badges, or containers force you to make decisions about width, height, and spacing. Constraints like this are incredibly helpful. They push you to design instead of decorate. Once the base letters work, you can start adding effects. Outlines, shadows, or simple 3D treatments add depth and polish, but only if the underlying structure is solid. Effects should enhance the letter and not rescue them. And finally, if you enjoy decorative elements, you can add subtle flourishes or even ligatures. Key here is that they grow out of the letters, rather than sitting next to them as separate ornaments. Think of them as extensions, not accessories. Now, it's important to remember that all of these examples are built the same way. Same construction, same principles, different decisions. That's the real takeaway here. So block lettering isn't really about memorizing styles. It's about understanding structures so you can adapt freely. Start with the skeleton, build thickness intentionally, space optically, and then explore proportions and layout. Pick one idea and try it today. If you want more inspiration, I've linked my hand lettering style resources and related tutorials below. Thank you for watching, and as always, I'll see you in the next one. Peace!